The galaxy was old, older than most species could truly understand. Civilizations had risen and fallen across 1 billion stars, leaving behind ruins and legends and whispered stories that traveled from world to world like seeds on the cosmic wind. Among all these stories, none were stranger than the tales of the Earth. Born Ambassador Kelvir had first heard the stories as a young child. Sitting at his grandmother's feet in the crystal gardens of Velar Prime, she had told him about a small blue world at the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm, where strange soft creatures lived without scales or shells or any natural protection at all. She described beings who chased dangerous animals across open plains until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Creatures who climbed frozen mountains simply because the mountains existed. People who strapped themselves to controlled explosions and rode them into the black void of space. Kelvar had laughed at these stories. Even as a child, he knew they were impossible. No species could survive such madness. The Earthborn were clearly a myth, a tale invented to frighten young ones or to illustrate the dangers of primitive thinking. Now, 300 cycles later, Kelvior sat in the great council chamber of the Galactic Coalition and listened to generals speak of defeat after defeat. The Dominion had pushed through the outer colonies with brutal efficiency. 17 worlds had fallen in the last cycle alone. The insectoid soldiers of the Dominion feared nothing and felt no pain. They existed only to serve their overminds, and the overminds wanted everything. "We cannot hold the reach of sorrow," General Toricam said, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of helplessness. 3 of our fleets have been destroyed there. The Dominion controls the corridor now. Nothing can stop their advance toward the inner worlds. The council members made sounds of distress. Kelvior watched their faces. These leaders of a civilization that had mastered faster than light travel when the mythical humans were, supposedly still hunting with sharp sticks. He saw fear in every one of them. He saw despair. He saw the end. The doors to the council chamber burst open. A young communications officer stumbled in, her scales pale with shock. She was Valari like Kelvar, tall and slender with iridescent skin that shifted colors with her emotional state. Right now, that skin was cycling through shades of disbelief and wonder. "Forgive the interruption," she gasped, "but we have received a transmission from the Reach of Sorrow. A ship has arrived. It does not match any known configuration in our databases." General Toricam made a dismissive sound. "Another scavenger, picking through the wreckage of our fallen vessels." "Ignore it, sir. The ship has engaged the Dominion Vanguard." Alone, silence fell across the council chamber. Even Kelvar, who had lived long enough to see many impossible things, felt his heart beat faster. "Show us," he said. The young officer activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. Light flickered and formed into an image of space. Stars scattered across velvet blackness. The wreckage of coalition ships drifting in silent testimony to their defeat. And there, moving through the debris field with impossible confidence, was a single vessel. It was not elegant. The Valari built their ships like works of art, all flowing curves and shimmering surfaces. The Kreth favored brutal functionality, their vessels resembling the armored beetles of their homeworld. Even the Dominion constructed their warships with a certain terrible beauty. This ship was none of those things. It was angular and blocky, covered in flat plates of gray metal. It looked like something that had been built by people who cared nothing for appearance and everything for purpose. It looked like a weapon. What species constructed this? General Toricam demanded. "I do not recognize the design." Before anyone could answer, the holographic display flickered again. A new signal was coming through, carried on frequencies that the Coalition had not used in millennia. Text appeared, translated automatically into High Valari. "This is Captain Danny Cole of the Earth vessel Resolute. We heard you were having some trouble out here. Figured it was time we introduced ourselves. Kelvir felt the blood drain from his face. His grandmother's stories echoed in his mind, tales he had dismissed as fantasy for 300 cycles. The Earthborn, the humans, the myth made flesh. Impossible, someone whispered. On the display, the Dominion Vanguard had changed course to intercept a strange vessel. 12 heavy cruisers, each one capable of destroying a coalition battleship with ease. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely alone. And then the small craft began to pour from the human ship's hangars. Kelve counted them as they emerged. 50, 100, 200. Each one was tiny, barely large enough to hold a single pilot. They swarmed out like insects from a hive, forming up in precise formations that spoke of endless training and iron discipline. "Those are not drones," General Toricum said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "The sensor data shows biological signatures in each craft. They are piloting those vessels themselves into certain death," another council member said. "The Dominion Point defense systems will destroy them in moments." But Kelvior was watching the human fighters with different eyes. He was seeing the way they moved, the way they adjusted their formations with split-second precision. He was remembering his grandmother's stories about creatures who chased their prey until it dropped from exhaustion, about people who rode explosions into the void, thought about beings who did impossible things simply because they refused to believe those things were impossible. Dominion cruisers opened fire. Space lit up with the deadly beauty of plasma lances and particle beams. The coalition officers in the chamber looked away, unwilling to watch the slaughter. Kelvir did not look away. The human fighters did not die. They danced through the barrage like leaves on the wind, spinning and rolling and diving through gaps in the fire that should not have existed. They were faster than they should have been, more agile than any biological pilot had a right to be. They moved as if the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules, and they were getting closer to the Dominion ships. "This cannot be real," General Toricum said. "No species can react that quickly. No biological entity can withstand those gravitational forces." On the display, the first human fighter reached its target. It dove toward the joint between a Dominion cruiser's main hull and its engine section, a spot where the armor was thin and the shields were weak, a spot that no automated targeting system would ever have identified. The cruiser exploded, then another, then a third. Kelvior found himself on his feet, though he could not remember standing. Around him, the council members were making sounds of shock and wonder, and something that might have been hope. The myths were real. The Earthborn had come, and they were magnificent. Commander Narration had served the Coalition fleet for 40 cycles. She had fought in the border wars against the Kreth before the alliance was formed. She had survived the destruction of 3 ships under her command. She had looked death in the face so many times that fear had become just another sensation. Like hunger or cold, nothing in her long career had prepared her for what she was witnessing now. The human fighters continued their assault on the Dominion Vanguard. One by one, the massive enemy cruisers were dying. Explosions bloomed in the darkness of space, beautiful and terrible, each one representing thousands of Dominion soldiers wiped from existence. The enemy fleet that should have crushed this single human ship was being torn apart. "Commander," her science officer said, his voice shaking, "I am analyzing the human pilot performance data. The results do not make sense." Narration turned to look at Thelon. He was Morath, an amphibious species with 4 eyes and skin that glistened with natural moisture. All 4 of those eyes were wide with something between fear and amazement. "Explain," she said. "Their reaction times," Thelon said. "The humans are responding to threats in under 100 milliseconds. That is faster than any known biological nervous system can process information. They should not be able to fly those craft. They should not be able to survive the gravitational forces of those maneuvers. They should be dead 1,000 times over. Narration watched the display as a human fighter took a direct hit from a Dominion plasma lance. The small craft spun wildly, trailing smoke and debris. By every rule of combat she knew, the pilot was dead. The fighter stabilized. It turned back toward the Dominion fleet. It continued its attack. "What are they?" Thalon whispered Dot before Narration could respond. A new voice crackled over her communication system. It was female, young, and filled with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Coalition Vessel Horizon's Light. This is Lieutenant Kate Hawkins of 1st Squadron. We have the Dominion Vanguard contained, but we are picking up additional enemy contacts on long-range sensors. Looks like they are bringing reinforcements. Captain Cole requests your assistance in coordinating a defensive perimeter." Narration activated her response channel. "Lieutenant Hawkins, this is Commander Narration. We are honored by your assistance, but I must ask how you expect to survive against reinforcements. Your ship is alone, and your fighters, while impressive, cannot hold off an entire Dominion fleet." There was a pause. Then Lieutenant Hawkins laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a desperate one. It was the laugh of someone who found the situation genuinely amusing. "Commander, we've been watching your war for a long time. We know the Dominion. We know how they think, how they fight, how they die. And with respect, you have been fighting them wrong." Narration felt a flash of anger. Her species had been spacefaring when these humans were living in caves. Her people had built empires that spanned star systems. Who were these newcomers to criticize their methods? But she swallowed her pride. The coalition was losing. The old ways were failing. Perhaps it was time to listen. "Go on," she said. "The Dominion operates on a strict hierarchy," Lieutenant Hawkins explained. "Kill the overmind that controls a fleet, and the soldiers become confused and disorganized. Your tactics focus on destroying enemy ships one at a time. Ours focus on cutting off the head." "We know this," Narration said. "But the overminds never expose themselves to danger. They stay in the center of their formations, protected by layers of defenders. Which is why you need to stop thinking like defenders and start thinking like predators." The word struck Narration like a physical blow. Predators. It was such an alien concept for the coalition species. The Valari were scholars and diplomats. The Morath were philosophers and artists. Even the warlike Kreth fought for territory and resources. Not for the simple joy of the hunt, but the humans, if the ancient stories were true, had evolved on a world where they were not the strongest or the fastest. They had survived by becoming the most persistent, the most adaptable, the most dangerous hunters their planet had ever produced. "What do you propose?" Narration asked. "Watch and learn, Commander." On the tactical display, the human fighters suddenly changed their formation. Instead of spreading out to engage the remaining Dominion ships, they consolidated into a tight spear formation. They accelerated toward the center of the enemy fleet, ignoring the cruisers on the edges, ignoring the point defense fire that erupted around them. They were going for the command ship, the vessel where the Overmind directed the battle. "They will never reach it," Thalon said. "The Dominion has 4 heavy cruisers protecting that ship. The crossfire alone will destroy them." Narration was not so certain. She watched the human pilots weave through the defensive fire with that impossible grace she was beginning to understand. They were not invincible. Several fighters exploded, their pilots dying in bright flashes of light. But the others did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They pushed forward with a determination that seemed to defy survival instinct. The first human fighter reached the Dominion command ship. It dove toward the bridge section, releasing its payload at point-blank range. The explosion tore through the ship's outer hull, exposing decks to the vacuum of space. More fighters followed. They targeted the communication arrays, the engine sections, the life support systems. They were not trying to destroy the ship. They were trying to kill one specific creature. The Dominion fleet began to waver. Ships that had been firing with mechanical precision started to miss their targets. Formations broke apart. Some vessels collided with each other. "The Overmind is dead," Thelon said, his voice filled with wonder. They killed the Overmind. The remaining Dominion ships began to retreat. Without their central commander, the drone soldiers who crewed them had no direction, no purpose. They fled back toward their own space, leaving behind the burning wreckage of their vanguard. Lieutenant Hawkins' voice came over the channel again. "Commander Narration, the enemy is withdrawing. First Squadron is returning to the Resolute for resupply. We lost 12 pilots in that assault. I wanted you to know their names." She began to recite them. Simple names, strange to Narasol's ears. Tommy Walsh, Maria Santos, John Park. 12 names for 12 humans who had died fighting an enemy that was not their own, protecting species they had never met. "Lieutenant," Narasol said when she had finished, "why did you come? Your world is far from here. This war does not threaten you. Why risk your lives for strangers?" There was a long pause. When Lieutenant Hawkins spoke again, her voice was quieter, more serious. "Because you needed help. And where we come from, that is reason enough." Narasol looked at her science officer. Thelon looked back at her. Neither of them could think of anything to say. The myths were real. The humans had come, and nothing would ever be the same. The sky above Vila Prime was burning. Ambassador Kelvea stood on the balcony of his ancestral home and watched the flames spread across the horizon. The Dominion had been on the planet for 6 weeks now. Their ground forces had pushed through the outer cities with ruthless efficiency, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. The crystalline towers that his people had built over thousands of years were crumbling. The gardens where he had played as a child were churned into mud by the passage of enemy soldiers. The coalition military had tried to stop them. They had built defensive walls and placed troops in fortified positions and done everything the tactical manuals told them to do. None of it had worked. The Dominion soldiers kept coming, wave after wave, dying by the thousands, but never stopping. They did not feel fear. They did not know despair. They simply advanced until they were killed, and then more came to take their place. Calver had sent the message 3 days ago, using communication channels that the coalition did not officially acknowledge. He had reached out to the humans, the mythical beings who had appeared at the reach of sorrow and destroyed a Dominion fleet. He had asked for their help. Now he watched the sky and waited for an answer. The dropships came through the clouds like falling stars. They were not graceful like Valari vessels, not elegant or beautiful. They were blunt and angular, built for function rather than form. They descended through the smoke and fire without hesitation, ignoring the Dominion anti-aircraft fire that erupted around them. Kel-VOR counted 12 dropships. A small number, compared to the millions of Dominion soldiers that covered his world. But he had learned not to underestimate the humans. The ships landed in the plaza below his balcony. Their doors opened with hissing sounds, and the humans emerged. Kelvar made his way down to meet them. He moved slowly, his old body aching with the weight of his years and his grief. By the time he reached the plaza, the humans had already begun to set up their equipment. They moved with quiet efficiency, each one seeming to know exactly what to do without being told. A human approached him. She was short by Valari standards, barely reaching his shoulder, with skin the color of dark wood and hair cut close to her skull. Her face was calm, her eyes alert and focused. She wore armor that covered her body in overlapping plates, not as thick as Kreth battle shells, but clearly designed to stop weapons fire. "Ambassador Kelvea," she said. Her voice was steady and confident. "I am Major Beth Carver, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. Captain Cole sends his regards." He would have come himself, but he is coordinating the orbital defense. Kelvea looked at the soldiers spreading across the plaza. They were so few, so very few. "Major Carver, I am grateful for your assistance, but I must be honest with you. The Dominion has over 2 million soldiers on this planet. Your forces, while impressive, cannot possibly hope to match those numbers." Major Carver smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. There was something cold in it, something dangerous that made Kelvea think of predatory animals he had seen in archives from various worlds. "Ambassador, we did not come here to match their numbers. We came here to change the rules of the game." She gestured for him to follow her to a portable display that one of her soldiers had set up. The screen showed a map of the occupied territories, with Dominion positions marked in red. There was a lot of red. "Your defensive strategy has been to establish fortified positions and try to hold ground," Major Carver said. "That plays to the Dominion's strengths. They do not care about casualties. They will throw bodies at a wall until it breaks, and they have more bodies than you have ammunition. What alternative do we have?" Kelvea asked. "We cannot outfight them in open battle." "No," Major Carver agreed. "But you can outthink them." She pointed to several locations on the map. The Dominion operates on a command structure. Every group of soldiers is controlled by a lesser mind, which is controlled by a regional commander, which reports to the planetary overmind. Cut those chains of command, and the soldiers become confused. They still fight, but without coordination or purpose. "We've tried to target their commanders before," Kelvea said. "They are always too well protected. Protected against conventional assault, yes. But what about unconventional assault?" Major Carver's smile grew wider. "What about hunters who can move unseen, strike without warning, and disappear before the enemy knows what happened?" She turned and whistled. A group of humans separated from the others and approached. They were different from the regular soldiers. Their armor was lighter, their movements quieter. They carried weapons that Kelvea did not recognize, along with blades that gleamed in the firelight. "These are my special operations teams," Major Carver said. "They have trained for years to do one thing extremely well. They find enemy leaders and they kill them. Nothing personal, just efficient." A male human stepped forward. He was average in height and build, with features that would have been unremarkable anywhere. But his eyes were different. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death many times and had learned to deliver it without hesitation. "Sergeant Nick Garza," he said, nodding to Kelvea. "My team is ready to deploy on your order, Major." Major Carver looked at the ambassador. "With your permission, I would like to begin operations immediately. Every hour we wait, the Dominion digs in deeper." Kelvea thought about his ruined cities. He thought about the millions of his people who had died or fled. He thought about the ancient traditions of his species, the belief that violence was a last resort, and that all conflicts could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. Then he thought about the Dominion soldiers, marching through the gardens where his grandmother had told him stories about mythical humans. "You have my permission," he said. "Do what you must." Major Carver nodded. She turned to her soldiers and raised her voice. "All units, we are weapons free. First objective is the regional command post in Sector 7. Strike teams will infiltrate while main force provides distraction. Remember, we are not here to hold territory. We are here to hunt." The humans began to move. They did not march like coalition soldiers in neat formations with precise timing. They flowed like water, each group finding its own path, adapting to the terrain around them. Within minutes, they had vanished into the burning city. Calvera stood alone in the plaza, watching the smoke rise into the crimson sky. For the first time in 6 weeks, he felt something that might have been hope. The hunters had arrived, and the hunted did not yet know that the rules had changed. The maintenance tunnels beneath the occupied city were dark and cramped. Water dripped from cracked pipes overhead, forming pools on the floor that reflected the dim red glow of emergency lighting. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and decay. Sergeant Nick Garza moved through the darkness like a ghost. His boots made no sound on the wet floor. His breathing was slow and controlled. Behind him, 6 Marines followed in perfect silence, each one placing their feet exactly where he had placed his. They had been underground for 19 hours. They had traveled 43 kilometers through tunnels that the Dominion had dismissed as too small and too dark for any species to use effectively. The enemy did not understand humans. They did not know that humans had evolved in darkness, had hunted in darkness, had learned to love the darkness because it gave them advantages that daylight did not. Private Lucy Dunn raised her hand in a fist. The team stopped instantly, freezing in place like statues. Garza moved forward to join her at the front of the column. 4 contacts, she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. Patrol formation 20 meters ahead. Garza peered through the darkness. His enhanced optics painted the world in shades of green and gray, revealing details that would have been invisible to the naked eye. He saw the Dominion soldiers standing in the tunnel intersection, their insectoid bodies covered in natural armor, their weapons held ready. The Dominion soldiers were impressive creatures. Each one stood over 2 meters tall, with 6 limbs and compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums. Their exoskeletons were hard enough to deflect most small arms' fire. Their reflexes were faster than any coalition species. They were not faster than humans. Blades only, Garza said. We need to stay quiet. The team moved forward. They did not rush. They did not make noise. They simply flowed through the darkness, each Marine taking a position around the enemy patrol without being detected. Garza gave the signal. 4 humans struck simultaneously. The Dominion soldiers died without making a sound. Garza's blade found the gap between the armor plates at the base of the first soldier's skull. Lucy Dunn drove her knife into the nerve cluster beneath the second soldier's primary arm joint. The other 2 Marines were equally precise, equally efficient. It was over in 3 seconds. 4 enemy soldiers, each one a deadly warrior in its own right, eliminated by creatures that the Dominion considered soft and weak. Clear, Garza said. Move the bodies. The team dragged the corpses into a side passage and continued forward. They had killed 37 Dominion soldiers since entering the tunnel system. None of those kills had been reported. As far as the enemy command structure knew, those patrols had simply vanished. This was the human way of war. Not grand battles with armies clashing on open fields. Not heroic last stands against impossible odds. Just quiet death in the darkness, delivered with precision and patience. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Garza consulted the map that his tactical computer projected onto his visor. They were beneath the regional command post now. The Dominion had converted an old Valari government building into their headquarters, filling it with soldiers and communication equipment, and the regional commander who directed operations across this sector. Entry point is above us, Garza said. The access shaft should connect to the building's environmental system. Private Dunn found the shaft and began to climb. The rest of the team followed, moving hand over hand up the vertical passage. It was exhausting work, but no one complained. Humans were built for endurance. They could keep moving long after other species had. Collapsed. They emerged in a maintenance closet on the 3rd floor of the command building. Garza cracked the door open and peered into the hallway beyond. Two Dominion guards stood at attention near an elevator bank. Beyond them, he could see the entrance to the command center. "Two targets at the elevator," he said. "After they are down, we move fast. The commander will be in the central chamber. Kill everything between here and there. Rules of engagement? Ask Corporal Sam West. No rules. No mercy. We hit them so hard and so fast that they do not have time to call for help." Garza checked his rifle one final time. "Ready?" The team nodded. Garza opened the door and stepped into the hallway. He raised his rifle and fired twice. Both guards dropped before they could react. Then he was running, his team spreading out behind him, moving through the building like a wave of death. The Dominion soldiers they encountered did not understand what was happening. They were trained to fight enemies who announced themselves, who formed ranks and advanced in predictable patterns. They were not trained to fight shadows that appeared from nowhere, killed without warning, and vanished before anyone could respond. Garza kicked open the door to the command center. Inside, he saw the regional commander, a massive Dominion creature whose body was partially merged with the command throne it sat upon. Screens surrounded it, displaying tactical data from across the sector. Lesser minds attended it, serving as extensions of its will. The commander saw Garza and let out a psychic scream that echoed through the building. It was a call for help, a beacon that would summon every soldier within range. Garza shot it in the face. The psychic scream cut off abruptly. The lesser minds collapsed, their connection to their master severed. Throughout the building, Dominion soldiers stumbled and fell, their coordination lost, their purpose erased. "Command, this is Garza," the sergeant said into his communication device. "Regional commander is down. Sector 7 is clear for main assault." Major Carver's voice came back immediately. "Copy that, Garza? Excellent work. Get your team to the extraction point. The party is about to start." Outside, Garza could hear explosions as the main human force began their attack. Without the regional commander to coordinate the defense, the Dominion soldiers fought as individuals rather than as a unified force. They were still dangerous, still deadly, but they were no longer unbeatable. The team made their way to the roof where a dropship was waiting to extract them. As they lifted off, Garza looked down at the city below. Fires were burning everywhere, but these were different fires. These were the fires of liberation, not conquest. 19 hours underground, Private Dunn said, slumping against the wall of the dropship. 43 kilometers on foot. 42 enemy kills. She smiled despite her exhaustion. Not bad for a day's work. Garza nodded, but he did not smile. He was already thinking about the next mission. There were other regional commanders, other command posts, other links in the chain that needed to be broken. The hunt was far from over. But the hunters were patient, and the prey was beginning to understand fear. The war did not end with the liberation of Velar Prime. Over the following months, human forces deployed across the Coalition's contested territories. They fought in the methane storms of Creth Secundus, where the air was poison and the ground shook with constant tremors. They waged guerrilla campaigns in the deep oceans of Marth Prime, adapting to underwater combat with the same frightening efficiency they showed everywhere else. They held the defensive line at the Burning Gate when 3 Dominion armadas attempted to break through to the core worlds. They died. Many of them died. But for every human who fell, more seemed to arrive from that small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. They came in ships that were functional rather than beautiful, armed with weapons that were simple rather than elegant. And they fought with a determination that none of the Coalition species could fully understand. Ambassador Kelvire had watched it all. He had seen his world rebuilt from the ashes, had attended the funerals of humans who had given their lives to save his people. had learned to recognize the strange expressions that crossed human faces when they spoke of home and family and duty. Now, one standard year after the first human ship had appeared at the Reach of Sorrow, he stood on the observation deck of the Resolute and watched the stars wheel slowly past. Captain Danny Cole stood beside him, both of them silent for a long moment. Cole was not an impressive-looking man. He was neither tall nor muscular, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult years and harder decisions. He looked like someone who had seen too much and carried too heavy a burden for too long. But Kelvera had learned not to judge humans by their appearance. Beneath that ordinary exterior was something extraordinary, something that the ambassador was only beginning to understand. "May I ask you a question?" Kelvioer said. Cole nodded. "Go ahead. Why did your people hide for so long?" The stories we told about humans suggested a powerful and dangerous species. With your capabilities, you could have dominated this region of space millennia ago. Instead, you remained on your homeworld, silent and invisible. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost sad. "We almost destroyed ourselves," he said. "More than once. When my ancestors first split the atom, they used that power to build weapons that could have burned our entire planet to ash. And they came close to using them. More than once, my species stood on the edge of extinction, not because of some external enemy, but because we could not control our own worst impulses." He turned to face Kelvio. "We had to learn some hard lessons about power and responsibility before we were ready to meet our neighbors. We spent a long time healing our world, healing ourselves, building a society that could venture into space without bringing our old hatreds with us. And during that time, you were watching us? Yes, we detected your transmissions centuries ago. We learned your languages, studied your cultures, observed your wars and your alliances. We knew about the coalition. We knew about the Dominion." Cole smiled slightly. "We knew you would need help eventually. We just had to wait for the right moment. And the Dominion attack was that moment? You were losing. Your people were dying. Your civilization was facing extinction." Cole shrugged. That was enough. Kelvera considered this. The simplicity of it. The alien morality that chose intervention, based not on advantage or profit, but on perceived obligation to complete strangers. "The stories my grandmother told me," he said slowly. "We thought they were myths. Exaggerations at best. Beings who hunted dangerous animals for sport. People who climbed frozen mountains because the mountains existed. Creatures who strapped themselves to explosions and rode them into space." Cole laughed quietly. It was a warm sound, filled with genuine amusement. "Ambassador, those stories your grandmother told you? The hunting and climbing and strapping ourselves to rockets?" He shook his head. "Those were just the things we did for fun. You have not heard about the things we did when we were actually trying." Kelvioer felt a chill run through his 4 hearts. He thought about the human soldiers he had seen fighting on his homeworld. He thought about the pilots who had danced through impossible barrages of enemy fire. He thought about the special operations teams who had moved through the darkness like ghosts and killed without hesitation or remorse. And all of that had been humans not fully trying. "Your species frightens me," Kelvera admitted. "Not because of your weapons or your tactics, but because I do not understand what drives you. What makes you willing to die for people you have never met? What makes you cross the galaxy to fight a war that was never yours?" Cole turned back to the viewport. The stars continued their slow rotation, ancient and indifferent to the small creatures who lived and died beneath them. "On our world," he said, "there is a saying. No man is an island. It means that none of us exists in isolation. What happens to one of us affects all of us. When we see someone suffering, someone in trouble, someone who needs help, We feel it. Not just in our minds, but in our hearts, in our bones. We cannot look away. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The Dominion looked at the galaxy and saw resources to be conquered. Your coalition looked at the galaxy and saw threats to be defended against. My people look at the galaxy and we see neighbors, family, people who might need our help someday. He smiled again, that strange, dangerous smile that humans seem to share. And when our family needs help, we come. No matter how far, no matter how hard, no matter the cost. The observation deck fell silent. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. The war would continue for another decade. The Dominion would eventually sue for peace. Their expansion checked for the first time in their species' history. The coalition would transform into something new, something stronger, something that included humanity not as a myth or a legend, but as a partner and a friend. But that moment on the observation deck of the Resolute marked the true beginning. The moment when the galaxy began to understand a fundamental truth that humans had always known about themselves. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. But when someone needed help, when someone was suffering, when someone was in trouble, the humans would come. They would cross any distance, fight any enemy, pay any price, because that was what family did. And now, the galaxy was their family too.